It's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story Podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hello, and welcome back to Her Success Story, where we hear stories of dynamic, gutsy women and a little bit about their journey. I have an amazing guest today, and I met her. I had attended a summit, event, a conference, however you want to phrase these things, a several-day experience, really focused on podcasting. And there were some amazing people in the room, and what we're drawing from in a few of our guests are people I met at the New Media Summit. Lynda Roth is one of the women I met there. And a few of the things that really impressed me and where I really said, okay, Lynda, we chatted a little bit. I want you as a guest on Her Success Story is her 30 years experience. So Lynda is not new to being a CEO of a company. She has a journey, a history behind her. She's got into the software industry in the 80s. I have to tell you something, in the 80s, I didn't own a computer. Okay. My printing company, we were late in coming into technology because of my natural resistance of moving all of our systems and processing from production and bookkeeping and accounting, etc., into the modern day era. So I was completely impressed that Lynda has this background, that she jumped in and she has built amazing company with clients that have ranged from Saks Fifth Avenue, Shearson, Lehman Hutton, American Express Bank back in the day. And she works all over the country, East Coast, West Coast, currently living in St. Louis, Missouri, the Twin Cities. Lynda, always correct me when I get these kind of pieces of information wrong. But welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much, Ivy. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited to give some information to your guests or to your listeners that might help them.
So, as I shared and I said to you up front, I was like, I respect a woman who's been in the journey of being a CEO and president of the company for 20, 30 plus years. Not to date ourselves, because I think we're not that same bracket here. So I'm just going to say in the 20 plus year bracket.
That's good.
I'll always say, do we wake up as a kid at 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old and say, okay, I'm going to be a CEO one day? Do you go to college and say, I'm going to be a CEO one day? Like when and how did this transform for you?
Well, I guess it's a couple of things, Ivy. I mean, first of all, I was raised in an entrepreneurial home. My dad owned his business all the time from the time I was a little girl until he retired at 70 years old. Uh-huh. However, during those years, it wasn't common for your dad to own his own business, right? Everybody else's dad, all my friends, everybody at school, they worked, for somebody, mostly big companies. And so when I would go to school and say, oh, my dad owns his own business, I felt ostracized. It wasn't normal. And my dad didn't want me to follow that way. He felt that the only reason he was in business for himself was because that was his only alternative, because he didn't graduate from high school. And so he wanted to see me, go to work for a big company. He wanted me to become an accountant. And I didn't really think that was a cool idea. But at the time, I really didn't think that far ahead. What happened was I couldn't decide what I wanted to do in college. I had tried working when I first got out of high school and wasn't making anywhere near enough money for that. So I said, okay, I have to go back to school. And my high school counselor is the one that suggested that I go to the 2-year curriculum at the junior college for information technology, which was the only type of degree you could get in information technology at that time.
Really? So
yes.
let's hear this. So back in the day, like now you need a master's degree in
Correct.
IT and programming and computer and this, that, and the other thing. And back in the day, it was just 2 years. It's like, okay, this is information technology. You're done.
Correct. You learned a few programming languages. First of all there was available was mainframes. So you had 2 or 3 primary languages, mostly COBOL, that systems were written in. And, they did some systems analysis work, and you had to learn business, which I already knew.
Right.
So,
thank you, Dad.
Yeah, thank you, Dad.
I'll throw both of our dads in there. Thank you, dads.
So it had, it seemed like a good thing. My high school counselor said, go take this program, Lynda, and you can get a good job and make a lot of money in 2 years. I said, that sounds like a good goal.
Great.
So,
check, sign up.
Right. So I signed up, having absolutely no idea what I was getting into. And I will admit that the first few months was challenging because I thought I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But I managed to persevere through it and do better than I expected. My dad and I had one of the times, which shows how understanding my dad was, where I was taking my first exam and I was studying and I just felt like I was lost. And so the night before I was all stressed out and I was crying and said, I just don't know what I'm doing. I don't understand this. And so my dad said, look, just take your test. And if you don't do well, then we can rethink what you want to do. Well, I aced the test. And so from there on, it was a little bit smoother sailing. I also got lucky. I graduated third in my class. And so because this was a new curriculum, the school was trying to place the top students in good jobs. So that helped me a lot. The school helped me get placed.
The school was behind you because it reflected back on them.
Correct.
And did they even know? So I'm curious. Did they know what kind of industries that needed people with this training?
Well, I grew up in St. Louis, and in St. Louis at that time, there weren't a whole lot of options. It was large Fortune 100 companies that had big mainframe computers and were trying to build up new IT departments.
Okay.
So the two biggest ones that they were working with, that the school was working with at the time, was McDonnell Douglas and Ralston Purina.
Got it.
And I just got lucky because McDonnell Douglas was known as just kind of an assembly line for programming, defense contractor and all that. Ralston Purina was a little bit smaller, and they just had a better reputation, and they placed me in Ralston, and it turned out to be a wonderful opportunity for me. But it wasn't without its challenges. When I first got started, I struggled, and they gave me a mentor, and she helped me a lot. And then the division I work for in Ralston.
Hold on, I have to interrupt.
Okay.
So what year was this that you got a mentor that was actually a woman? I have to know these kind of details.
Okay, 1973.
Wow.
Quite truthfully, it's very interesting. When I started out in the early to mid 70s in information technology, there were a lot of women in it. I had a mentor at Ralston, and then at that division, the first division I worked at was the division that does the animal food.
Okay.
And so after 9 months, they had a cutback. And I tell you what, you want to feel scared when I was technically 19 when I started working. I think after 9 months of being there, I had turned 20. So I was 20, right? And I'm working where most people are at least in their 30s. And one morning, they come in and they separate us, and they send some people to one conference room and some people to another conference room. And when they came in the conference room I was in, the executive said, the people that are in this conference room are the people that are staying.
Oh my.
Yes. And I'm sitting there going, what's going on?
Like an early stage of American Idol.
Exactly. So they were having a major cutback, and I was kept because I was the cheapest.
Cheapest.
Right.
Business 101.
Exactly. And then a couple of months later, they had an even greater cutback, but they liked me so well and felt that I was doing so well, they arranged to move me to another division.
Nice.
So then when I went to that division, I got lots of opportunities in that division. The person I worked for was a man, but there were two other women in the group that I worked with that were developers also.
Okay.
And I told them that I didn't want to just write programs. I wanted to do other things. So I was in what was considered a maintenance group at the time. So all you did was fix other people's code. You didn't get to write anything new of your own. Where when I had been in the other division, I was writing new programs all the time. So my boss gave me opportunities to work on smaller projects that came to his group. And then when an opportunity came to work on a large project, what was really funny, there was an opportunity that came to work on a large project, and the manager of that group was known to be very difficult to work for. Okay. So my boss called me and he said, Lynda, I want to offer you this opportunity. The manager of this department has agreed to take you, but I want to warn you, he's very difficult to work for. And I said, I worked for my dad from the time I was 15 years old. I can work for anybody. So this man and I hit it off very well because all he wanted was people to perform.
Yeah.
And we hit it off very well. We had a very good relationship. So
jumping forward. So you had this background in corporate. You truly brought value and stayed on through various transition, changes, and opportunities. Then what happened?
Well, then I got an opportunity to move to California.
Okay. So now you're a St. Louis girl, family's in St. Louis.
Right.
And you go into that scary place where nobody works, everybody looks great. Southern Cal, because we've chatted a little bit, so I know that information.
That's right. I moved to Southern California. Well, actually, I moved to Northern California first, but it didn't take me long to head to Southern California. How
did this transpire?
Again, it was fate, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't something that I said. Well, the primary thing I had said was, I'm tired of living in St. Louis. I remember having a conversation with my sister, and I said, there's got to be other places other than here. And so I just started watching the newspaper, and suddenly one day there was a big advertisement for Levi Strauss, right, which of course is headquartered in San Francisco, and they were hiring for developers to work on a new, at this time, highly technically advanced warehouse in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now, for a girl from St. Louis, you know that Little Rock, Arkansas is the sticks.
I was going to say, yes, that's not going forward.
No, that wasn't going forward. But what Little Rock, Arkansas was a doorway to California, because when they interviewed me, they said, if you take the job in Little Rock and everything works out, then when that project is done, you'll be moved to California. So I took the risk.
There you go.
And so I was 6 months on that project and moved to Northern California and worked for Levi's. And that was a very good stepping stone, but I hated Northern California almost from the very beginning. And so after a year or so in Northern California, my two sisters had also moved out a little bit west. And so I called them up and said, I'm moving, and I think I'm going to move to Southern California. And so they both said, well, you move there and we'll move with you.
Nice.
So Southern California it was. So then I still stayed in corporate. I got a job in Southern California, but it was in that move that then I started, getting more savvy, meeting more people, and also consulting became something that was happening. I went to work for a software company, and we started seeing, myself and a couple of the people that worked at the software company, we started seeing opportunities where clients needed our help. And in those days, software companies thought all they did was sell software. They weren't going to do any consulting. So a couple of us decided to go out and start consulting. And I've been self-employed ever since.
So a couple of things. So you knew you're a family person. I assume I'm going to reach here and say your sisters are part of your support team. Yeah. Right? And you navigated it saying, okay, I'm going to go here. Girls, you're joining me, or where are you going? And let's coordinate it. So right. we have our team together, which is, how do we transition and how do we build things? We think we do it on our own, but it's always about what's our support team, and support teams don't always look like the accounting department. Right.
Yeah, it was just something that all three of us, I guess, at that time, we're close in age, the three of us.
Nice.
There's almost exactly 3 years that separate me and the third one, and the middle one's in between.
Got it.
And so we were all in our early 20s, and California sounded like a good idea.
So did your sisters end up, I know you stayed in California for how
I stayed in California
40
for 40 years. Yeah.
40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And your sisters?
Well, they stayed out west, but
Okay.
the one closest to me, she ended up within a couple of years meeting and marrying a gentleman that was from Santa Rosa. So she ended up moving up to Santa Rosa, and she's lived in Santa Rosa ever since she left Southern California, and still, well, she lives north of Santa Rosa now. Her kids are grown, obviously, and they moved up to Washington. So she moved up to Clear Valley Lake, I think it is. But anyway, she stayed in Northern California. The other sister, she wasn't much for the big city. And so she ended up settling in Tucson, Arizona, and she raised her kids in Tucson.
How lovely.
Yeah, so we all stayed out west. But in different places.
So in this journey you've been in, and you are a woman leader among leaders because you have gone to bat for yourself, you've taken risks, you've been open to opportunity and willing to jump in with it. What is some of the what's a couple of the surprises that you've seen and learned from?
I think almost everything I've done has been a surprise. Probably none of it's been planned. But I guess one of my big surprises about myself maybe was that all of a sudden one day when somebody I knew, actually somebody I was working for when I was consulting, had suggested that we become partners and build a software company. And I had never even thought of something like that. But I was frustrated at the time that the systems that were available didn't give management much information. Mm-hmm. And so when he had suggested that we do that, I said, okay, I can see designing something like this. And so I really jumped in with both feet on that one, because by this time it's the mid 1980s. It's still all mainframes, and nobody lends money or gives money to a software company, to anybody in technology, because they didn't see any value in it.
Okay.
So, I mean, we had to do a lot of things. Since it was all mainframes, you don't buy mainframes and put them in your garage, right? So,
really?
Yeah. So the first thing I had to figure out was, how are we going to develop this? Then I had to find people to hire on a team. And so what we ended up doing was I found people. I had to get them employed. So I started putting them in consulting jobs. And one of the consulting jobs was with First Interstate Bank. And so one day I'm just out on a standard sales get to know you call with First Interstate Bank. And the managers, that's got a couple of my consultants there, started talking about this project they were working on with a big 8 accounting firm that I won't mention that was struggling. And so he thought that we could help, and would I be interested in taking it on? And I said, sure, I'll take a look at it. So it was right up our alley on what we wanted to do. And I had to do a demonstration that I knew something about banking. So my team and I were able to put together real quickly some online screens that looked like they were showing up reports that they could have about product profitability in products that banks had. And so I do this little demo, and at the end, they looked at me and they said, I thought you said you didn't know anything about banking. So, well, I know banking from a consumer side, so I just flipped it around, right?
Right.
So we got the job, and that got us launched. And then I guess the next big surprise was landing American Express Bank. We had made another deal with a software company that they were the company that had the database that we built on. And they made a deal with us that we could use their computer equipment. So we got free development time, unlimited, right? And they would be able to sell our products. So their New York office got really into selling our product. And they brought us into First Interstate Bank. We used their offices to have our demos. I had to put together a detailed demo. American Express Bank wanted to see how we could change it to different languages. Now, of course, again, you got to go back a lot of years. In the 1980s, there weren't any software companies where you could sit down and have an English version and then change it to Spanish or French or anything like that.
Right.
And so I had looked up how to translate some of the screens that we had, and the way we had developed the system was very flexible. It was very easy for me to do that, and I could change it to Spanish in front of them. And so when we got done with that demo, they were like, "You're hired."
So, Lynda, I want to ask you this. You clearly are a pioneer in the sense of women in leadership. And did you ever feel that you were the minority in the corporate world as a woman? Was that ever prevalent for you, or was it that IT, especially in the early years, stood on a value unto itself that it didn't matter?
I think it's probably a combination. First of all, I mean, for the most part, all my bosses were men. But there were a lot of women. Like I said, I had other women that I worked with that were in the environment with me. When I hired my team for the software company, we might have had a few more men than women, but it was pretty equally, pretty equal group. But I tell you, I've worked in corporate America for a lot of years, as I've said, and I've only had very few incidences where I thought a man that I was working with was inappropriate with me. Very few. And I shut them down pretty quickly, and they didn't argue with me. And most of them were just comments. Like, for example, at one time, I walked into an office that I was working in. It was the software company I was working for. And when I walked in, I had to walk past the offices of the management, and the sales manager, I think, whistled at me. And so I went back and put my things down. I went back to his office and cleared everybody out of his office and shut the door and just said, "Don't you ever do that again. This is not a construction zone." I never had any trouble with him again. So I guess I was just accustomed, because my dad owned a business, and I was just accustomed to it. It didn't seem abnormal to me at all.
So any tips or advice for women who are navigating the corporate path, and for women who are making the decisions to go out and build their own companies?
Well, I think my biggest is don't be afraid. You just have to jump in. What I have found is that when I jump in, when an opportunity presents itself and it seems like a good opportunity to me, I take advantage of it, and the answers come. I get the right opportunities. I didn't have the qualifications to start that software company by any stretch of anybody's imagination. I had never been in upper management. I had never been a CEO. I mean, I knew accounting. I watched my dad build a company, so I guess maybe I had more knowledge than I thought I did. But when it came to negotiating deals, like when we were at First Interstate Bank, I had let my partner negotiate the first deal, and it wasn't in our best interest. So when we went back to renegotiate, I said, "I'm doing this one because they're going to start paying more." Right. And he was all worried about, well, they might not hire us. I said, "Are you kidding? They can't do this project without us." And so I just held my ground. And actually, my dad did teach me this when I negotiated, when he taught me how to negotiate for my first car. He taught me not to be intimidated by the dealership, by the sales rep, right? And secondarily, not to always answer right away, that silence could be a good thing. So I remember
golden nugget here. Golden nugget.
Silence is a good thing.
I'm going to, yes. So expand on that, because that's such an important piece when we are in a sales conversation. And it doesn't matter if you're in a sales conversation with a CEO, if you're in a sales conversation with, your first client or your 100th client. Silence is golden.
Exactly. And so when I was negotiating with them, we had some discussion, and I laid down what I felt we needed, and we had some give and take. And so the executive I was speaking with wasn't immediately willing to move. And so I just said, these are our terms, and just sat there. And after a few minutes, he broke the silence. And, the rule is whoever breaks the silence first loses.
Correct.
So anyway, he broke the silence, and, he negotiated a little bit, but I got what I needed out of it. And that's done well for me in a lot of things. I've learned to be quiet and let somebody else stew, and it gives me time to think of how I'm going to respond.
On that note, because that is brilliant. That is brilliant. How can people learn more about you? How can they be in touch with you? They want to know more about first of all, before we even give that information out, where are you today? You're no longer in Southern California. You've made a life change, and it works for you. Go for it. Tell us. Right.
Well, like I said, it's been a very long time in Southern California. I had a career in Southern California I don't think I could have had anywhere else. I loved it. I've done many, many things. After I left my software company, I started executive consulting, and I work today for a variety of different clients, primarily on what people today call digital transformation.
Okay.
And I thoroughly enjoy it. But I was coming to a point through a lot of personal issues when both my parents passed away. I had a cousin I'm very close to that lives on the East Coast, that she had some health problems, and it just seemed like it was time to go home. It was almost exactly the opposite when I left. When I left, it was like, I got to get out of here, right? And when I decided to make the transition to move back to St. Louis, it's time. It's time to move off of the West Coast and get closer to family. And with today's technology, I can work from my home office and do all that. My clients are in Southern California still, and are a lot of them right now. And so I work from my home office. I'm on the phone constantly or on the email, and then I make trips out to visit my clients, usually about once a month.
Beautiful. Beautiful and nicely done. And tapping into what's important to you at this stage in your life and creating it and making it happen. And I think one of the most important teachings is to be able for all of us to tap into ourselves and understand that we transition through different periods of our lives, and to listen to what is important to us at different times.
I would agree. I mean, there was a time when working all the time, growing a business, and everything that went with it was extraordinarily important. It was the most important thing in my life. I'm not to say that I didn't visit family. I mean, I've always been very close with my family. And once we got to where I made more money and flying was much cheaper, considering, all the other different modes of transportation, I came to St. Louis 4 or 5 times a year. It wasn't a big deal for me to get on an airplane and fly out to St. Louis for the weekend.
Right.
But for me, there came a point when that wasn't the most important thing anymore, and that I could make a contribution and still do a lot of things by being back in St. Louis. And the other thing that was nice about St. Louis, I mean, it's my hometown, but really you can get anywhere in this country from St. Louis pretty easily.
It's a great launching point.
Correct.
Yeah. So for those of you who want to connect with Lynda, share with us how to connect with you.
Well, I would say the 2 best ways are LinkedIn. I'm plastered all over LinkedIn, and you can just search for Lynda J. Roth on LinkedIn and you'll find me. Or my cell phone, if you want to have a conversation. My cell phone is 818-216-7264. And that's also on my LinkedIn profile.
And I just want to mention to our listeners, Lynda is spelled Lynda.
Oh, thank you very much for reminding me of that, Ivy.
So check out Lynda, Lynda J. Roth, Roth. We're connected on LinkedIn, so you could see some of our mutual connections. You should be connecting with all of us. Remember to leave a review at the end conclusion of listening to this podcast. Let Lynda and I know what you think. What do you want to know more of? It's the way we can get in touch with our listeners and give you what you're asking for. Lynda, I know how you're a busy woman. You're like, I've been on calls all day. So I cannot thank you enough for taking a good chunk of time and sharing your story and being so encouraging, real, and authentic with the listeners of Her Success Story.
Oh, thank you. And I'm very happy to talk to anybody that would like a little bit of mentoring or get more information or whatever. I like to mentor younger people and do whatever I can to help them.
It makes a world of difference, ladies and gentlemen, is to have a great mentor in your life. So thank you again. Check out Lynda, Lynda J Roth, Roth, on LinkedIn. You could find all the details in our show notes. And remember to leave a review so we can be in touch with you and give you what you're looking for. Thank you for joining us, Lynda, and thank you for joining us, listeners. See you next time on Her Success Story.
Thank you, Ivy.
Don't need your approval anymore, 'cause I've got mine.